Welcome to Bonding, a kinky podcast hosted by me, Sarah Butcher, aka Sub in the City. I'm a BDSM coach, kink educator, and proudly collared submissive, with over a decade of experience on the BDSM scene. I'm on a mission to bring BDSM into the 21st century and empower curious kinksters like yourselves to consciously explore what BDSM means to you. In this podcast, you'll hear me talk about all things kink. So whether you're new to the scene or you're a long-standing member of the community, welcome kinksters. I'm looking forward to bonding with you. Hello everyone and welcome back to Bonding. This week on the podcast, I want to talk about another topic which I very often get asked about, both by couples and singles, and that is how to stay consistent with your kinky lifestyle. This also fits in very nicely with the New Year, New Kink theme, because just like many other areas of our life, January is a time when we want to try and implement new habits and have a vision of what we want our life to look like for the coming year. And while on the one hand this is really great to reevaluate your kink life, it can also mean that we start putting a lot of pressure on ourselves to achieve a certain outcome. You know, just like when we set ourselves fitness goals or career goals, it's great to set yourself kinky goals too, but one thing I find that my clients come to me with is this disappointment when they haven't yet achieved said goal, or when things start to dip, they feel as though they've failed. Does this sound familiar? If so, then keep listening because I want to explore consistency in kink and how you can maintain a healthy kinky lifestyle or dynamic. This will include reframing what 24/7 dynamics really look like and how to manage your kinky expectations so you can truly enjoy your exploration. So when it comes to dominance and submission in particular, developing a dynamic that works for you will take time. And it's also something that you'll never stop working on, as the wants and needs of each person evolve and change over time. The most common struggles I hear are around trying to establish a new power play dynamic in an existing long-term relationship or marriage, and those in long-standing DS dynamics no longer feeling the same satisfaction that they once did, causing friction in their relationship. So let's start with the first scenario. Congratulations on deciding to embark on your very own kinky journey. In deciding to do this together, you're already further ahead than you realise. And one thing that naturally happens here is the excitement of the newness of it all can mean that exploration is very much ad hoc. You're trying all the things, doing all the research, watching all the inspo. Every opportunity you get, you're experimenting with a new kinky thing you've just learned. Essentially, this is the honeymoon phase of dominance and submission. And I'm referring to DS dynamics for the purpose of this discussion, but this can also be applied to any dynamic or any kinky lifestyle preference too. Now, while this is all fun and games, and there will certainly be periods in your life where you can have these epic bursts of immersive kink exploration, such as a kinky weekend away, what I want to address in this episode is that while I can't speak for everyone, from my personal experience based on the people I've worked with over the years, is that this fully immersive 24/7 lifestyle doesn't always feel attainable or sustainable for many of you, and that feels frustrating. Now again, I just want to acknowledge that there are people out there who do have very successful 24/7 DS relationships in a very literal sense, such as stay-at-home submissives. And if that's possible for you long term, then that's awesome. But what I'd like to do today is reframe the concept of the 24/7 dynamic for those who this doesn't always feel attainable to, but it's still desirable. And for those of you who feel like your consistency in your kinky life has slumped, this is what I want to say to you. We are only human. And we have other responsibilities and duties in our everyday lives, which unfortunately sometimes brings kink down a peg or two on the priority list. Many of us have families, kids, demanding jobs, second or third demanding jobs, leaving the window for kinky time seemingly getting smaller and smaller. What I have also noticed is the pressure that many seem to put on themselves to use every waking moment of free time, when we don't have to tend to the family, the kids, or the demanding jobs, to being in kink mode, and that if we're not, then we're doing something wrong. There is this assumption that 24/7 doms and subs are constantly in the mood for kink, and this is just not the case. If we expect ourselves or our partners to constantly be up for it, this leads to issues such as one or all partners feeling like they're not good enough, trying to force the dynamic in a way that doesn't feel authentic or pleasurable in order to meet the expectations of your partner, yourself, or someone else entirely. And this can ultimately make the dynamic feel like a chore, which is the last thing that you want. Your power exchange should never be led from a place of feeling like you have to in order to tick some kind of kinky box. And this is where I want to address the concept of 24/7 dynamics and what that really means. Because I get a lot of you asking me, Sarah, is a 24/7 DS dynamic really possible? Is it realistic? I mean, it appeals to a lot of people. The ideal of being completely immersed in your DS dynamic. But just with anything that markets itself as unlimited, there are always rules and caveats. And this is what I remind my clients of when they come to me disappointed that they can't seem to maintain this literal 24/7 dynamic. And so I want to break this definition of a 24/7 dynamic down a little bit. When we go by the ethos of BDSM and kink being different for every individual and no two dynamics are the same, we can start to demystify and reframe the concept of the 24/7 dynamic that we envision in our heads, which perhaps sometimes looks something like spending your days locked up in a cage or walking around the house in chastity with no other responsibilities other than to please your partner at any given moment. Or it could be lounging around in your home with numerous slaves serving you cocktails and grapes, giving you foot rubs. Things that sound like they may have been true in ancient Rome. I mean, these heavily romanticized scenes can absolutely exist in our world. But for most of us, this kind of immersive indulgence is one that happens over the course of a weekend every other month. But outside of that, DS dynamics must adapt to the everyday lives of the modern world. This is where those rules and caveats come in. So I want you to consider what 24/7 really means to you, because you are the one that gets to define that. If you imagine your DS dynamic as a box on top of a map of your life, where do you feel comfortable seeing those borders expand to? Think of this as your kinky window of tolerance. Where do your dominant and submissive roles start and end? And do they really end, or do they simply take on a new form? Consider elements of your life such as family events, work, the office, social events, in the home, holidays, and more. Reflecting on this will start to give you a picture of where your dynamic can be at its fullest, and where you might need to adapt or agree to put it on standby. Just because your dynamic might not expand to all areas of your life, that does not mean it can't be defined as a 24/7 lifestyle for you. To give you a little personal insight, I consider myself to be in a 24/7 DS relationship, but this doesn't mean that I'm at the beck and call of my dominant 24/7. Not only is this not realistic for me, but it's not for him either. We know the areas of our life in which we can be most outwardly in our dominant and submissive roles, and we know the areas of our life where it needs to be put on pause. For example, work is work, and in that space, I'm not in my submissive space and he's not in his dominant space. So how can this be a 24/7 dynamic? This is where those all-you-can-eat buffet rules and caveats come in. And it goes back to the basic principles of a healthy kink dynamic, limits and boundaries. Just because I'm not in my submissive space at times does not then negate the entire dynamic that is being worked on and nurtured behind the scenes. Your dominant can still be your dominant, but respect that you will not take orders at work. Your submissive can still be your submissive and respect that you had a tough day with the kids, and so coming up with tasks for you hasn't been their number one priority. That doesn't mean the dynamic is broken or lost. It just means you need to stay open to adapting. And this is where you need to give yourself credit where credit is due. Keeping up a consistent DS dynamic is not all sex on tap, whips and chains, and a walk in the playground. It does require work, just like any type of relationship. So for those of you sitting there feeling like you're not doing enough, I just want you to take a moment to reflect on your dynamic and the things that you're doing, plus all of your vanilla responsibilities that you're juggling, to give yourself some perspective. And what people are usually focusing on when they get into this mindset is using play as a way to measure how immersed in their dynamic they are. And that's really not an accurate measure at all. If you only want to engage in DS on a physical level, that's cool. But then that's a different dynamic altogether. And that's one that will be limited by logistics. But for those of you wanting to develop a deeper dynamic, there's so much more that goes into it than physical play. It's the rules, the rituals, the aftercare. It's the language you use and the way you address each other on a verbal and non-verbal level. It's the little things that symbolise your dynamic that only you know about. This all contributes to an immersive dynamic that exists on a 24/7 basis between you in your world. So if your dominant has had a hard day with the kids and can't find the energy to give you tasks, but you still want to serve, think of other ways you can do this that can meet your needs to submit in those moments. Perhaps it's a foot rub, running them a hot bath, or preparing their favourite meal. If your submissive is at work and you're feeling the urge to dominate, come up with a delicious plan for a scene that you can do when your schedules next allow. Again, this also comes back to taking responsibility for our own desires, and don't expect someone else to carry the dynamic all of the time. A successful 24/7 lifestyle is one that is adapted to suit your existing lifestyle, one that can meet the needs of everyone consistently and exists on a schedule and timeline that is most importantly realistic to you. It is not a lifestyle that is only deemed worthy when you are actively engaging in play. This is why I say it's so important to not compare yourself to others on this journey, because we are all so different. So my top tip to you is to adapt, adapt, adapt. Are you a current submissive whose rules and tasks are feeling too much? Then let your dominant know. The last thing they want is for you to feel as though these things are a chore, and also they're going to get pretty fed up asking you to do things and then you never doing them. Remember when I said that communication is one of your most important foundations for success? This is just another example of why. And this also brings me back to the other common issue I hear, which is existing dom subdynamics fizzling out and not feeling the same level of satisfaction anymore. Everything I've just said also applies to you. Take a look at your life and dynamic from a bird's eye view. What's changed in your life since you first established your dynamic? Because the same dynamic cannot be sustained when the goalposts are moving. Perhaps you've had a baby, adopted a puppy, got a promotion at work, moved house, recovering from surgery or illness. The list goes on. And you don't even need to have a big life event to prompt you to change up your dynamic. As human beings, we all have fluctuating moods, libidos, appetites, tolerances, and so your consistency will fluctuate too. For you, that might look like monthly check-ins to reevaluate and refocus on the areas of kink that you're into in that moment. And it could be coming up with new rules and rituals to cater to your capacity for the next 4 weeks. I hope that gives you a little perspective on the concept of 24/7 dynamics. No one else is judging whether you're domming or subbing hard enough to feel worthy to define your dynamics as 24/7. Ultimately, it's not really about what you're doing, but how you feel. Consistency in your ability to be honest and aware of your capacity and limitations for certain things is what will ultimately build consistency in all areas of your dynamic in a way that feels realistic and pleasurable for you. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your friends. And if you want to continue to consciously explore your kinks, be sure to check out my upcoming workshops and events at subinthecity.com/events, or book your one-to-one BDSM exploratory session with me today at subinthecity.com/booking.